The first evidence, of course, is that it's interesting that the calendar that we have begins on that day of June 5th at 8 p.m. In the year of 8,498 BC. There is no other sort of necessary explanation as to what the reason is why they would have begun their count back then, except for that there was also in the heavens at the time a very bright sort of constellation of three stars that all sort of came into an alignment back then, and it can be shown that this asteroid would have ordinarily perhaps been able to escape, but because of that alignment, it pulls this asteroid in on a sharper trajectory toward the Earth, and until such a moment is that gravity has got hold of it and it's inescapable, so that it comes in and punches two huge holes in the Earth. But it is interesting, as I said, that it coincides with the conjunction of the three brightest celestial bodies, the Sun and the Moon and Venus. And it is interesting that their calendar also begins with this conjunction that can be shown back through astrology to have occurred about that time of June 5th, 8,498 BC in the Gregorian calendar count. It is interesting that when we look at pollen, we can find that there was a radical permafrost melting around that time. That can be shown to be due to the warm Gulf Stream, which is many, many, many degrees warmer than the cold waters of the Atlantic that come down from the north. Those cold waters always circulated more above the island of Atlantis. But once Atlantis was sunk, the warm Gulf Stream travelled further up and caused, England and Ireland and Norway and all these countries to have much, much warmer type of climate and a very beautiful maritime type of climate. This all occurred around about the same time. And then as the ice melts up there, eventually, of course, it floods down through the Mississippi. And lots of evidence shows when this flood occurred, and it coincides around about this time frame, about 10,000 years ago, that we're talking about. Of course, there's some eels, which those eels, they live in, they reproduce in this Sargasso seaweed, which is out off the Caribbean in the Atlantic Ocean there, and up around about as high as Charleston, North Carolina, which Charleston, North Carolina, in the Carolinas there, you've got a lot of pockmark of meteorites and that had settled there, and then that shows that bits and pieces of even probably the Earth that came up and fell back down again, and pieces of the asteroid broke up as well. And there's just an enormous amount of pockmarks of impact zones right there. But the eels have a peculiar habit today of travelling northeast from that region, and they travel about 3,000 kilometres or more to get across to fresh water and things in Northern Europe and Europe, where the female eels travel up into the freshwater, where they sexually mature, and they're up there for some time before they come back out again. But it can be shown that it's a strange behaviour, because lots of the eels lose their life having to travel that far. But if we could imagine that for eons and eons and eons of time, they always travelled in that direction, and they would have come to the fresh waters of the Atlantis. And there they can have gone through their sexual maturation, the females can have. But once Atlantis was gone, they still had the habit of travelling in that direction and just couldn't get it out of them. But now they have to travel an enormous distance, and lots of them lose their life on the way. But still to this day, it's a very strange habit that they have, that they travel that far across the Atlantic Ocean. But it can be certainly evidence that at one point there was an island there that they were able to travel to, and that once it was gone, they only had a memory of being able to travel in that direction, which still to this day they do. It's interesting that when core samples have been got from the ocean bottom there in Atlantis, you can see that down 5, 6, 7,000 feet, we find a bacterial ooze which has a sedimentary layer, which for the most part that can only have ever formed and had its life in its lifetime at a depth of only 1,800 feet at the most. But that there's a sedimentary layer of this material that's very far down, showing that the sea floor dropped away quite radically. And when they were putting in the Atlantic cable, it's amazing that any relics of anything could be survived much. But if people listen to our ancient past, which you so kindly have made available for people, there's all sorts of artifacts and things that have been found which just don't really fit into the wall that's presently built about our history. Certainly, a spark plug being found in a geode certainly shows that the geode is younger than the spark plug. The spark plug is older than the geode. We can certainly reverse engineer that, and that it is absolutely, no doubt it, a spark plug, and that the calcium bakelite material that forms the upper part of the spark plug, it can be shown is an actual material that's been made from seashells. So there's no question about it that we have had a past which, because it came under a deluge, civilization was lost, and the advancement of this civilization also was lost as a result of this, which we can even see evidence in our own life of a people having advanced up to a certain stage, but then just being, because of conditions, being driven back to more like a very primitive level, and a loss of a lot of their technology and their more civilizedness, as we can consider this to be more civilizedness. So island of Atlantis also, we have various things. For instance, we've got a chromosome in our mitochondria, and there's one type of chromosome called haploid X, which some people have within them. But most all of these chromosomes can be traced back to an origin of a continent, but the haploid X is the one that isn't traced to anything, which is today a lost continent, which I would hypothesize that, and others have too, that this haploid X chromosome comes from Atlantis. But it's amazing because when you look at the people that were in Europe at the time, you've got Neanderthal man, and Neanderthal man, of course, has quite a large brain in relationship to body. So a brain weight to body weight ratio is quite much larger capacity than what it is today. But Neanderthals were really only about 5 foot in their height, roundabout. The Australian Aboriginal, for instance, which is like a Paleolithic sort of man, or human, I should say, not man, a human, was around about 6 feet, but that the Cro-Magnons were about 7.5 feet tall, and you could say that the comparison between the skeletal structures and outlines a Diluvian Neanderthal man and a recent Australian Aboriginal and a Diluvian Cro-Magnon, and that the North American Indians and the Basques, people in just off in Spain, the Basques, they have a racial type which shows a great similarity in their facial features and their skin colour and their size, which shows that the North American Indians, certainly east of the Rockies, which are more Gulf Indians, their language and the Basque language have some similarities, and of course the Indians west of the Rockies really have been influenced a lot by Gracile, and their language is very similar to Chinese, and it's got still lots of Chinese in it, and even chromosomes can show that there's quite a similarity between the North American Indians that's west of the Rockies having a bit more Chinese descent, but that the Indians east of the Rockies, which are more all the Gulf Indians and things, all the way up to the very northeast of America, that they have quite a more of an Atlantean heritage. We have lots of buildings and structures made out of stone, temples and things, all around the earth, which have the same measurements applied, which shows that it was built by a similar people that left their technology for things to be built. But if we go back 10,000 years, that was the end of Atlantis on that date, as we talked about.